Okay, welcome back to Occupy the Media. Now let's talk about a story that's been developing in Denver, Colorado. The city council has banned the homeless from, quote, camping outside, but if they don't have a home, where are they supposed to go? Chad Kautzer is with Occupy Denver. Chad, tell us, give us a sense of what this law, it's actually been passed, this ordinance actually does to prevent people from quote-unquote camping outside, and then we can talk a little bit about the larger issues that are raised by this.
So the law is a city ordinance. The ordinance bans camping, but we should put that in quotation marks.
A lot of air quotes going on.
Yeah, absolutely, because camping is anything that would protect you from the elements. So if you pull up a piece of cardboard or a piece of plastic over yourself, you're technically now camping, and that's now illegal. So folks who don't have homes, who are forced to sleep outside, who try to cover themselves from the elements when the shelters are full, can be cited or arrested.
And so even though the language of the law says no outdoor camping in any public place, and of course any private property, what it actually does was specifically directed toward homeless people, to people that were sleeping outside and putting some type of covering on top of them.
Absolutely, which is why it's morally reprehensible. It's really an unbelievable move on the part of the city council, because they know and they have heard from every provider in Denver that the shelters are overflowing, that there's 2,000 people on a waiting list for social services. It's beyond capacity, and everyone testified to that effect. And so these are folks who have nowhere else to go.
And so, Marcy, what did the proponents of this particular law, why did they want this passed? We're talking about, you know, many members of the city council, but it was largely the downtown business community here in Denver.
It was, yeah. Denver has this large stretch of a block, 16th Street Mall, and it's mostly walkable in the downtown area. There's a lot of businesses there, really nice restaurants, you know, and little shops, and it was mostly that association. People there saying, well, it's all these homeless people that congregate here, and they're driving away business, because who wants to come to my coffee shop? Who wants to come to my restaurant when there's homeless people panhandling? So they were the ones that really went out and went to the city council and said, we need this to protect businesses. You know, and Occupy Denver, I think, did a really great job of going out and showing, you know, like you were saying, how reprehensible it is. Well, it's not that these folks are out here because they want to be. You know, it's one of the few places in town where they can go and feel somewhat secure, because a lot of the buildings are pretty tall. So, you know, it blocks a lot of wind, it blocks snow, it provides coverage.
Yeah. And this law kind of has two prongs to it. There was the homeless that are sleeping in and around downtown in public places, but then also there was the Occupy Denver encampment that went up like many cities around the country, and the mayor, the local law enforcement didn't necessarily have the right ordinances and laws to route people out of that, even though eventually they did. But Chad, do you think that this law was specifically targeting or came about because of Occupy Denver?
That's a complicated question, in part because there was a form of this law proposed in the past and it was defeated. It's complicated because Occupy has politicized the homeless in Denver. And so what you see in front of the Denver Capitol, or the Colorado Capitol here in Denver, is you see the row. We've created a row basically of homeless folks who are sleeping on the sidewalk. They sleep on the sidewalk because they're not allowed in the park, so they sleep on the sidewalk. And Occupy Denver has committees and folks who are dedicated to helping them, medical needs, food, you know, liaisoning with the police, etc. And so homelessness has been politicized by Occupy. I don't think this is directly an Occupy issue, but it has mobilized Occupy because it is an economic justice issue.
And of course, it would still directly affect the small number of people that are still camping out or encampmenting right there in the center of Denver under the Occupy Denver banner. But we can move into a little bit about what this means nationally, because there are a lot of laws that that are being considered or have already been passed around the country. But why is it that we shouldn't have a law like this? Why should anyone have a right to be able to they're not talking about just like sleeping somewhere in public. It's setting up tents or sleeping bags, or having all of your belongings sort of piled up in a public space or in an area. Is that necessarily a right? Why should people have a right to do that any more than I would, you know, parking my car on a sidewalk?
Yeah, I like the way you phrased the question, because there was this old saying that the rich and poor alike have the right to sleep under a bridge. And that was a criticism of inequity and power in our society, different classes, because of course the rich are not going to sleep under a bridge. It's only the poor that are going to sleep under the bridge. But you literally have an ordinance now where the poor and homeless can't sleep under the bridge. So if we want to put it in context of rights, we have to talk about the rights of those to survive, because we're talking about folks who have nowhere else to go. And if I can just tie in quickly the themes of your show, you have J.P. Morgan, who is one of the facilitators. They invented credit default swaps, right? The deregulated credit default swap. That's a J.P. Morgan invention. That's a cancer cell that set off this recession. Now we have millions of foreclosures. We have homelessness increasing. We have poverty increasing. And now we're penalizing those who are the most vulnerable in our populations. And Jamie Dimon is going on television, you know, mea culpa, I'm really sorry, it was just a mistake. And he's walking free. When we're penalizing the most vulnerable people, we don't have shelters. There are no beds. There are no services.
So you would say then, if you are going to pass a law like this, if you are going to criminalize something, it's not just giving someone a ticket, it's a criminal violation to be sleeping outside, then what would the city need to do? At the very least, provide enough of these beds? So if you're going to say you can't be here, well, there has to be an alternative?
Yeah, well, I mean, let me jump in for a second and
Please,
say,
yeah.
you know, what I think is going to happen here is you've got people who are going to get ticketed who don't have money to have a home, so certainly don't have money to pay an ordinance or a fee. You know, they're going to go to jail, so what's going to happen? Well, our jail population is going to skyrocket.
Okay, and we have a post on Facebook from Karen B. She says, "Stop the madness. Homelessness is not a crime. These laws are ridiculous." And so speaking about this law here in Denver, Colorado, but this is one that at least has been explored, if not passed, in different cities around the country. But they were focused on the Occupy Wall Street type of encampments. We're talking about two different types of encampments. There's the Occupy Wall Street encampments where you'd have, you know, cooking areas, you'd have tents, you'd have
Libraries,
other things like that, but then the actual homelessness issue. But either one of those bring up this notion about what is public space, who owns public space, and what are the rights for people to exist in that space. But Chad, what do you make of either laws like Denver being considered, you know, being passed in Denver, but then being considered around the country?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. There are laws like this popping up everywhere. And there was actually a report that came out recently. It's a U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness that said, actually, this is absolutely the wrong way to go about it. And it gave a 54-page report on all the ways we can beef up services and have them interrelated in order to prevent homelessness or get people into homes, affordable houses. And so, but you know, reason is not prevailing in this case, and so we are using the default position, which is the police, to remove from sight, not house, but remove from sight the most vulnerable, right? And that pushes them away from services. That puts at-risk youth even more at risk that are on the streets.
Well, in the Denver police, they have said, well, this law has just been passed, but they're going to put in policies within the department that says we're not just going to go around arresting people that are laying down with a tarp over them, that we're going to, you know, arrest at a last resort, and they won't arrest anyone if there are no shelter beds available. It seems like they're trying to say, well, we're targeting the chronic homeless, the ones that don't actually want to go into a shelter, the ones that we don't have any legal means to actually get them to leave these public spaces. What do you make of that, Chad?
Well, that's what they say, but that's not in the ordinance, right? So what is in the ordinance is if you are covering yourself with a blanket or a piece of plastic, you are in violation of the law. Yep. Right? And so, you know, they also say we're going to increase services, although there are no plans to increase services or shelter beds, right? So we want to see that in writing, we want to see that in policy, we want to see that in funding, right? We can't just say, well, it's up to the Denver police to decide. That's great, because we've seen in the past the way the Denver police have dealt with both the homeless and Occupy Denver. And I should just say that in Denver, those two are not separate. Those are interrelated issues in downtown Denver. Occupy and the homeless population are interconnected.
Okay, well, Chad, I did say that you were with Occupy Denver, but I also forgot to mention that you're also a professor of philosophy at CU Denver. So thanks so much for joining us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, we asked our Facebook and Twitter followers, how do you feel about cities like Denver banning the homeless from camping outside? Mark writes, this is the worst thing that we can do to the homeless. Bob says, I feel that they are only doing this to portray the image of a clean city. Kyle writes, this makes me ashamed to be an American. Most homeless people are veterans who fought for the country. All right, that's it for this week. Just to remind you, Free Speech TV is a nonprofit organization and does not take funding from corporations. So if you like what we're doing here at Occupy the Media, we could really use your support. Help us continue our mission by becoming a member at freespeech.org. Thanks a lot for joining us today. We'll see you next Wednesday, next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific on Occupy the Media.
Population keeps on breeding, nation bleeding, still more bleeding. Life is funny, skies are sunny, bees make honey. Who needs money? More for me.